Hi, everyone. I have to say I'm feeling pretty lucky, a little bit nervous, but pretty lucky to be one of the final speakers here because I've had it's been such a privilege to hear from so many diverse presenters about so many amazing things that everybody's doing over the last few days. I'm going to talk today about feedback, and as the title says, giving it a place to land. So I'll start by discussing feedback literacy in general before diving into the more practical aspects of what we're doing, how it works, and what the students are getting out of it. So before I start, though, I would like to just acknowledge that even though we are gathering online here today, here in Australia, we're all on First Nations land that was never ceded, never given up. I'm on Bundjalung country in the beautiful northern rivers of New South Wales right now, as you can see behind me. And this is the traditional home of the Arakwal people. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and all those who care and continue to care for country. So a little bit about me. As I said before, I am privileged enough to live on Bundjalung country, west of Byron. I'm still based at CET, the Centre for English Teaching at Sydney Uni, where I wear a lot of different hats depending on what day it is. But I work mainly across our university pathways programs, coordination and educational design, which largely covers digital space these days. At the bottom of the slide here, I've got a great screenshot of some of our team at the height of the pandemic, bravely solving the problems of our little world from home, as I'm sure the rest of us were as well. I do think of myself primarily as a teacher, though, which I think is really important for us because, you know, what happens in the class, it does have to inform everything else we do. We can't forget it. I've always been a bit of a nerd when it comes to technology, though, so my position now has really given me a unique opportunity to combine my love of teaching with my love of solving little techie puzzles. So if anything that I talk about resonates with you, or if you want to hang out in gumboots sometime, please feel free to get in touch with me. My email address is there. So now you know about me, and now I would like to hear from you. So I'd like us to get a bit of a sense of what your experience of feedback might have been and why it was memorable to you. So I'll just pop this link in chat, or you can scan the QR code using your phone. Shout out to COVID, teaching us all a lot more about QR codes than we ever needed to know. And there's a few questions for you to answer there via Socrative. So you can use that link, scan the QR code, just type in the room name, Alana CET in capitals, and hopefully we'll get a few coming through. Okay, there's a few people who have jumped in there right away. Fantastic. All right. Wow, the responses are coming in. So I'll just give it another few seconds there. And I'm going to look at your answer to the first question first, and then a little bit later, we'll look at your experiences of technology as well. Okay, so we're getting there. All right, some interesting results coming through there. Yeah, that's right, Shona. PD on a QR code, on QR codes. Yeah, I know. They really came up with no warning, didn't they? I had a lot of friends who didn't even have smartphones when COVID happened and suddenly had to figure all that out. All right, so we've got quite a lot of responses here now. So I'm going to just pull up a few of them here. So, and they are all anonymous, so don't worry. So we've got, so this was about feedback you received and why it was memorable for any reason. So I recently got feedback in a driving lesson. It was memorable because I thought I'd done terribly, but they helped me to see the positive aspects. Yeah, fantastic. So it is good to feel like you've, despite maybe not having done the best job, you've still kind of gotten something right. Yeah. Okay, there's some negative feedbackers here as well. Like obviously sometimes that negative stuff really sticks as well, which is, yeah, it's unfortunate, but I guess it does give us that that lesson of what not to do. And then this one I like as well. It was memorable because it gave both positive reinforcement as well as some critical direction. And it also took my goals as a student into account. Yeah, fantastic. And then, yeah, so lots of constructive criticism as well, which is definitely what we want to see. Obviously, we want our students to be able to move forward with what they're doing. And something that's common to a few of these responses is really that this feedback that you received, the good stuff at least, maybe not the negative stuff, it had really tangible actions that you could take to improve what you were doing. And so this sort of sits really well within the framework that I'm operating in for this particular presentation and activity, which is called Feedback for Learning, Closing the Assessment Loop. I've got the full document and also a simplified version in a Google Drive folder. So there's like a little kind of infographic version that's really helpful. So I've just popped the link to that in the chat, and I'll put all my slides and links from here in that Google Drive folder as well after I finish today. So in this framework and in other works that they've put together, Carless and Boud, they define feedback as this process through which learners make sense of information and then use it for improvement. So if this is the definition that we're operating from, anything that doesn't do this, it really just stops at the point of being information and it never actually really becomes feedback. So there needs to really be a usefulness to the feedback. So all that negative stuff that you heard, not useful feedback. But we can't just expect students and sometimes even teachers as well to understand this process or that it even is a process. So there does need to be some training to develop feedback literacy amongst students and teachers. So just quickly, there are a lot of different types of feedback that students might come across in their studies. So I will just clarify that when I say feedback here, I'm talking about teacher feedback. So this last one at the bottom here. Now, unfortunately, there is some ongoing evidence that suggests that it doesn't actually matter what the content of the feedback is that we give students. Sometimes students often say that they actually don't find it helpful or that they don't even read it at all, which is great. So, but rather than seeing this as a deficiency in that feedback that we're giving, I sort of like to think of it a little bit more as showing a need to develop students' understanding of what they need to do with that feedback. So learners need to develop their own sense of the necessity of that feedback. And this is the autonomy, I think, that Hayo spoke about in his open plenary on Tuesday. And that was a great session as well. And it's only really when feedback moves away from this kind of one-way transfer or information dump, as I like to think of it, and becomes dialogic, that it becomes a lot more successful. And so then you might sort of think, great, that makes sense. And I'm already doing something a bit like that with my students. So where's the kind of ed tech angle to all of this? So now I just want to quickly go back to what we found out in Socrative. So those other questions that you answered, and just have a look at some of the experiences that you had. And of course, Socrative has decided to log me out right at the opportune moment. But hopefully we've still got our results here. All right. So it seems like a bit of a split here. Oh, well, you know, the majority of us didn't use a computer or take a computer to campus or to school. How did you submit your assignments? A lot of paper-based. Yeah, me too. I still remember at Sydney Uni, like the day of my paper being due, doing the mad dash down Eastern Avenue to get to the box to drop off the paper with the cover sheet and everything on it. A little bit different to what students do today, I think. And obviously that means the feedback that they get is a bit different as well. So a lot of us got feedback on paper, not as many of us got feedback online. And did you read your feedback? You're all so good, clearly amongst teachers. I was a bit naughty. I didn't always read my feedback. I was a little bit scared sometimes. And did you do anything with it? Yes. So quite a few people did something with it. And And hopefully some people have explained a little bit of this. So yeah, so people don't really, some people don't review, so there's not too much in the chat there about what people are doing with the feedback, but hopefully if you did something with it, that's a good sign. And it is sort of good to point out as well that we are sort of amongst people who, you know, have this sort of value of education as well. And for our students, it's not always 100% clear that there is something that they need to do with the feedback. A lot of them will just receive it and think, all right, that's done. So just pop back to my slideshow here. And so the experiences that we have kind of suggest that, you know, we aren't as familiar with this digital feedback, but obviously, you know, we've all upskilled a lot over the past couple of years. And so we have to look at it in the context of that. So we're not just operating from our own experiences, but, you know, it's obvious now that the majority of feedback is delivered digitally, and to an extent, it is sort of what students expect. But while digital feedback is really useful and effective in all of the ways that we know about, there is still that danger of it staying in the realm of feedback as telling or as being one way. So how many times have we all marked a student's work while saying, oh, this is exactly what I told them not to do last time, right? But I do really like what Washer and Meskel term it as here, which is that the key is not the tech, but it's how we use it to facilitate a human experience. So not hardware or software, but in humanware. And this is something we've seen a lot of over the past 3 days, which is really fantastic as well. So just to check in before we dive into this bit of tech that I'm going to show you guys, the key things that we've touched on so far are these. It's that feedback isn't just information, it is a process, that moving it online is not a silver bullet, unfortunately, sorry about that. And above all, that learners need to be active and to be literate in the feedback process. So moving on to the tech that we're using, and we had started doing things in this area prior to COVID, but the shift to online really kind of accelerated this process and the extent of what we were doing. So the system that we use is called the Student Relationship Engagement System, or the SRES, and it was developed to personalize engagement with student cohorts. It is free, so if you like what you see, then hop onto sres.io to get a bit more info. It is very comprehensive, and we use it for a whole range of things, so I won't overwhelm you with it, but pertinent to today is that it can be set up for data entry by both teachers and students, which is really useful. I will say, though, that I know that the constant influx of new tools and techie things can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. And this is a great system and I totally recommend it, but I understand that you might be thinking, well, this is a great idea, but I'm just not going to use another tool. And so what I've done at the end of the presentation is just include a few links to other ways that you might do the same kind of process. So a Google Doc and a Padlet that basically mimic the process, but it's just in a tool that you might already be using. So the system integrates with our LMS, Canvas, and after feedback on a task is entered by the teacher, then the student can access this via a personalized page called a portal. This is what the portal looks like from the student's point of view. So when the feedback is in there, they can access this as many times as they want. And this is sometimes viewed also in conjunction with a marked up copy of their work. Now, what comes after this is what we've loosely termed an acting on feedback module or an activity. And this is another panel that appears underneath that feedback from the teacher that we saw on the previous slide. And it's set up to allow students to enter their own responses. So this is what that looks like. Quite simple, not very exciting, but you can add like pictures and bits and pieces to it as well. But as you can see, it prompts students to identify their strengths and areas for improvement in a few different ways. So they use the drop-down box here to select the criterion that they did the best in, and then articulate what they understand about that in the text box in their own words. So then they do the same thing for the areas they could do better, and then they need to ask their teacher a question about their feedback. And this is kind of aimed at opening up that dialogue about what happens next now that they've got the feedback. So the setup of these data fields was quite deliberate on our end so that we can sort of draw on the different skills and understandings of learners in scaffolding the activity. So a drop-down box with selections is pretty straightforward for them, and it's a relatively easy process for them to just identify one or two criteria in which they may have got the highest score, for example. The text box is a little bit trickier. It's a bit more qualitative, and it asks them to elaborate a bit further. And we have seen that some students only really go the first step of selecting the drop-down box, and that's fine. They're still engaging with the feedback, and maybe that's as far as they go the first time, and then maybe next time they add a little bit more. The data entry is quite customizable though. So you've got drop downs, you've got radio buttons, all kinds of stuff. So you don't actually need students to type anything in to show that they've understood. You could use emojis and sliders and things like that for lower level students too. So you've seen a little bit about that setup, and I do just want to talk a little bit about the different possibilities of using this with students at different levels. So you might get the students to do this either before class or while they're in class, but generally you do want to make that initial feedback open and available to them before they come to see you. And this just gives them a bit of time to digest the feedback on their own, and particularly useful for second language learners, as there's obviously some decoding that'll have to go on at different levels. So if this is the first time you do it, it's a good idea to work through it together as a class, just to ensure that students understand what you're asking them to do, and you can pre-teach any of the concepts or vocab that they need. And this just really helps them start to develop that meta language that they need in order to improve their feedback literacy. If they have a firmer grasp on the activity, if they're a bit higher level or they've done it before, then you might then move to a more flipped model of having them read the feedback and do the data entry, the acting on feedback, before they even get to you in class. You can look at the responses before class and then use these to sort of streamline your consultations, to understand what they want and locate resources to share with them before you talk to them. You can also group students together based on the areas that they identify. So you might group students with similar responses, which saves you a bit of time, or you could group students with different responses, and that allows for a little bit of peer learning as well. This is just a few ways that we've seen teachers using it. I'm sure there's a million more that you could think of. But let's have a look at the responses that we've got from students and what this shows about their feedback literacy. I'll show you responses from 2 students, and we do try to keep this as non-prescriptive for teachers as possible, so that they can kind of interpret and implement it whatever way works for them. So first here is Alice, and this is from her week 2 practice task. I'll just give you a moment to read her responses. So she's identified here 2 areas of strength and explained her understanding of these, and I think she's done quite a good job as well. In the areas for improvement, she's identified that she struggles with vocab and grammar, and that this might impact the expression of her ideas. And what I really love about her question at the bottom here is that she's deliberately linked it with her need for improvement in that area by asking that question. So how can I work more on these areas? So as a teacher, this is the type of response I would really love to see, because it really gives me a place to start in this feedback conversation. So with academic vocab and grammar, for example, to work with her to create some kind of action plan for what she should do next. Next, I'll show you the responses from another student, Shinyi, which are a little bit different. So Shinyi has also identified 2 areas in which he's doing well, but his explanation of this is a bit less detailed than Alice's was. But what's really interesting is that he's identified his capabilities, but also what he could do more of. So he's obviously not only read the feedback, but he understands that there's a nuance to it as well. So I think it's clear from this that students are sort of developing this sense of feedback, not just being an information download, but actually it's like this living, breathing thing that really does require their participation. There is certainly more for us to do, and we're looking at moving forward is perhaps refining the questions further, working out ways to turn this loop into more of a spiral. So doing things like following up on action taken and how this is reflected in their subsequent work. It is something that teachers are already doing individually, but I'm really interested in seeing how it plays out at an organizational level as well, and what else the analytics from this can tell us about our students in relation to their performance. these are the documents I talked about before. They're in that Google Drive that I put in the chat, and you'll see the slides as well when I upload those. But the main idea I want to leave you with is just in getting that feedback dialogue started with your students in whatever way you feel most comfortable with and that works best for your context, but also to avoid that whole set and forget sort of mindset that comes in a digital tool for feedback, and instead using it really strategically to support face-to-face interaction